H2 Talk, 6th of February in Brussels. And we talk today about clean hydrogen as a catalyst for the next clean industrial deal. We are living very, very interesting times where after a legislature, a 5-year period of the Green Deal, the Green Industrial Deal, we enter into a clean industrial deal. What does it mean? What does it entail? And why do we turn from the word green to the word clean? I'm very happy today to welcome guests in our H2 Talk, which is a superb lineup you will see later on. Before we get there, my name is Yorgos Chatzimarkakis, CEO of Hydrogen Europe. I would like to set a little bit the scene where we are with regards to our goals. If we go to the first slide that I would like to present, I have not a lot of them. We are living in a rapidly changing world that sees the rise, possibly, of new empires. We see definitely, and have over Christmas read books that many of them refer to the global East. So China with a fueling station, Russia trying to dominate things. DeepSeek showed us last week what this entails, what this can impose to the rest of the world. On the other hand, a new US administration that really sets clear targets, clear goals. And where are we as the European Union in this new fight for global dominance? So whereas the European Green Deal that we were quite proud, all of us together, in the end, as a compromise to come up with, entailed the Fit for 55 goals and climate neutrality until 2050. Also, emission trading system, the taxonomy that is now put again under some criticism, but the clear phase out of fossils and some new technology edge. We now need to balance out the competitive advantages and disadvantages that we clearly see in some of these legislations to something which the European Commission with Ursula von der Leyen called the future of European competitiveness and the clean industrial deal, to be presented 26th of February, so in a few days. And we are all keen to understand, what is it? What is this new clean industrial deal? We were promised to see low energy prices, and there will be higher demand. So energy prices have led to a situation of deindustrialization in some countries. And that's the big risk, that the deindustrialization is faster than the decarbonization. We understand that more and more some priorities on certain technologies are removed. So we had a good exchange with the new Energy Commissioner Dan Jurgensen last week, and there the consensus was that the electricity first idea, not to say ideology, is not the best approach anymore to bring down the energy prices, because we have seen, especially over the Dunkelflaute last weeks, how electricity prices go up, although we have so many cheap renewables. So technology neutrality, I would sometimes rather prefer diversity, because we are not neutral. We want certain technologies to be in, will come up. Also, how can we attract companies, SMEs, small and medium enterprises, to stay in Europe or to start new businesses in Europe? And also, we talk a lot in our hydrogen sector about the FIDs, the final investment decisions. But what about the FDI, the foreign direct investment that also needs to take place? And we see clearly that Europe has lost attractiveness. So this is what we expect of this clean industrial deal, to balance the disadvantages out that we have seen with the European Green Deal. And 6 pillars have been proposed. Next slide will show us the 6 pillars, and I will go down the clock. So start with affordable energy and raw materials. That's one big and important pillar that is part of this clean industrial deal. So how to accelerate renewable deployment, how to design EU strategies for hydrogen imports. That's part of what the Commission announced. What to do with grids. We understand that the priority on electricity is removed. Okay, fine. But what does that mean? Our idea is very simple. 3+1 grids are cheaper than 1. So if you invest into electricity, gas, hydrogen plus CO2, 3+1, it will be much cheaper. Develop critical raw material procurement, improve permitting for advanced and for raw materials. Then the second pillar is simplification. In our case, it's the question of what do we do with the delegated act that exists on the renewable fuels of non-biological origin, the Refinobio. So when will we see another delegated act on low carbon, including or not including nuclear? Big question for some countries, maybe for the whole continent. How can we make sure that RED III, the Renewable Energy Directive, which entails clear obligations for the hydrogen sector, is also put into practice and can be enhanced? So how to facilitate a workable environmental regulation? Second pillar, simplification. Third pillar is how to have a higher demand for sustainable products in the EU. So how to incentivize the offtake of green products and stimulate the demand in so-called lead markets. That's a very, very important issue. And how to develop resilience and sustainability-based non-price criteria. So if you have a public procurement, and want to build a bridge, why do we always go for the cheapest steel? Can we do something in order to go for the greenest or the cleanest steel? I come to the fourth pillar, which is the global competitiveness. We have the carbon border adjustment mechanism, but it needs to be reviewed. And that is also part of this clean industrial deal. In which direction does it go? We develop also at the moment global hydrogen certification schemes. Normally Europeans go ahead and can set basically the scene. Let's do that. We can act against unfair trade practices. We have seen that in the second call, the second launch of the hydrogen bank, Chinese products have been put under a certain question mark. So 75% is the maximum that you can build upon Chinese products. 25% need to be non-Chinese. This is not a red card, it's a yellow card, but it's a reaction. And it enhances, hopefully, and we will discuss that today, global competitiveness. Then the fifth pillar is how to enhance the funding and financing. So can we strengthen the hydrogen bank? Can we ensure also that the Connecting Europe facility, that's the infrastructure tool, supports hydrogen infrastructure? We talked about hydrogen, 3+1 cheaper than only electricity. How to keep the current state aid designs and enhance at the same time the Net Zero Industry Act support schemes. By the way, we have non-cumulation. Delegated act says you cannot cumulate. So how does it work? If you cannot cumulate different sorts of funding, it's not indeed workable. Tell us many market participants. Last, also very important point is the skills and fair transition. So we are building up a hydrogen academy at the moment. We need skills, new skills, in order to upskill and reskill people. We need to streamline the training and funding opportunities, and also to develop common European training certification standards. All this is part of a, if you wish, re-industrialization instead of a deindustrialization. And let's discuss today with our participants how this can be put into practice. I am very glad to announce as our first keynote speaker, Professor Andrea Wechsler. She is member of the European Parliament. She is member of the EPP group, so the biggest group in the European Parliament, and also the same political family as Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Of course, she's in the ITRE committee and plays a role in that in industrial and energy sphere of the parliament. But she also has a background of international economic law. She is an expert on intellectual property, competition law, and international trade. So all the aspects that we need here as a competence in order to enhance our position. She is a professor, assistant professor in Hanken School of Economics in Finland, but has also worked together with the Max Planck Research School for competition. And so lots of competence. And I've heard a lot of your colleagues, Andrea, being very, very fascinated about your skills and knowledge in that field. And we are honored to have you here today to give us an insight into how the EPP Group, how the European Parliament looks into the developments of next week, and what you are waiting when we talk about the CID, the Clean Industrial Deal. Andrea Wechsler, you have the floor.
Well, dear Mr. Chatzimarkakis, thank you very much for your kind words and for having me here as keynote speaker. I'm very honored, and it's a privilege to be here today. It's more like sitting here today and to discuss a very, very crucial topic for Europe's future, our Clean Industrial Deal, and how it must drive European strategic autonomy, but also the hydrogen economy. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I was very pleased to see all the 6 pillars on the Clean Industrial Deal that have been identified so far, and also the reflections on the Green Deal and the Clean Industrial Deal. As has been pointed out, the European Green Deal was envisioned as a transformative strategy, a model that could balance economic competitiveness with environmental sustainability. It set very ambitious goals, achieving net zero emissions by 2050, ensuring energy security, and maintaining Europe's industrial leadership. So far, so good. And then we saw reality was setting in. We realized high energy costs, regulatory uncertainty, and this has already been pointed out in the introductory words, a global competition that's testing our commitments to the Green Deal. If we fail to link environmental ambition with economic pragmatism, we risk undermining our own industries. And the lesson is very clear. Decarbonization alone does not equate to competitiveness. Europe must now transition from an idealistic Green Deal to a more pragmatic, clean industrial deal, one that ensures sustainability and strengthens Europe's industrial base. Now, Europe's energy-intensive industries, from steel to chemicals, face mounting pressures. Our energy prices remain 2 to 3 times higher than those in the United States, while China, through state subsidies and industrial policies, dominates hydrogen production with a 33% share of global output, compared to Europe's 7%. And without affordable energy and predictable regulations, European businesses will relocate, taking jobs and innovation with them. Moreover, our fragmented regulatory landscape slows investment. Permitting processes for new hydrogen projects take years, while the US provides clear incentives like the Inflation Reduction Act, making renewable hydrogen production significantly cheaper, around $5 per kilogram in the United States. We cannot afford to be slow while the rest of the world races ahead. Despite these challenges, hydrogen remains a strategic pillar for Europe's industrial future. Now, the demand in Europe will increase substantially, making it a cornerstone of our energy system. Without hydrogen, green steel production is impossible. And without green steel, our automotive and construction sectors will struggle to compete globally. However, the current trajectory is not delivering. The EU aimed to install 120 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity by 2030. Yet at the current pace, we will reach barely 1/20th of that target. And the answer is clear. We need a market-driven, a technology-neutral approach that includes both renewable and low carbon hydrogen. Now, to make the hydrogen economy work and secure Europe's industrial base, the Clean Industrial Deal must focus on several priorities. First of all, industrial prioritization. Europe's industrial strategy must prioritize competitiveness. The Net Zero Industry Act should not be an administrative burden, but a catalyst for private investment in hydrogen and clean technologies. And so we need a reality check on hydrogen policy. So the current regulatory restrictions must be re-evaluated to ensure Europe remains competitive. Pragmatism must replace ideological rigidity. Second, regulatory simplification. Permitting processes must be streamlined. The United States and China are fast-tracking industrial projects, while European companies struggle with years of bureaucracy. The Clean Industrial Deal must mandate faster approval timelines and a technology-neutral approach to low-carbon hydrogen. Third, low energy costs. The EU must unlock domestic energy potential, including nuclear and natural gas with carbon capture. Hydrogen produced from nuclear energy must be recognized as low carbon. The European Hydrogen Bank must work with private investors to ensure realistic and cost-effective support mechanisms. And last, a stronger push for clean technologies. Europe must accelerate hydrogen infrastructure. Only 5 out of 29 planned large-scale electrolyzer projects are progressing, and this must change. A European import strategy for hydrogen must be developed to reduce dependence on a single supplier and secure partnerships with North Africa and other strategic regions. So we need a Europe that leads, not a Europe that follows. So we are currently at a crossroads. Europe has the technological expertise, the industrial base, and the ambition to lead in clean technologies. But leadership is not granted, it's earned through bold actions. A clean industrial deal grounded in competitiveness, technological neutrality, and pragmatic regulation is our best opportunity to maintain Europe's leadership in industry and energy. If we get it right, Europe will not only decarbonize, but it will emerge as the global leader in clean industrial innovation. Let us not allow bureaucracy and ideology to stand in the way of progress. The time for action is now, and we face great opportunities. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Many thanks, Professor Andrea Wechsler. Can I ask you about the mood? Because I think we all fully subscribe to the goals, the mood in the European Parliament and the possibility to get majorities. We saw that Mrs. von der Leyen managed to get the majority for a second term. It was a big question mark before, but now she's empowered with, I think, even a better result than the first time. Do you think that the Clean Industrial Deal will get sufficient support from your colleagues in the European Parliament in order to, well, get us into this leadership position that you rightly said?
Well, I'm optimistic and determined to work hard. So the answer is clearly yes. Will it be easy? No. Of course, there are fears that we are backtracking on the Green Deal. I don't think these fears are corroborated. And we need to really start and continue the discussions also in the European Parliament that this is not an either or, but it's a Green Deal and a clean industrial deal. And I think when you can take away those fears, I stay optimistic. There is a clear chance for majorities. We've got a great set of commissioners out there, and we're determined to work hard on this. So yes, I'm optimistic.
Excellent. And thanks very much for organizing also the subgroup within your parliamentary group on the hydrogen, on everything hydrogen. That's very, very helpful. And you already invited stakeholders, I think in December, to give a feedback. And we are looking forward to your assessment. And we'll, of course, try to cooperate with you as good as we can. So whatever you want to ask the sector, please don't hesitate. We are there to support your parliamentary work, of course. Also, thank you.
Thank you.
Please stay with us if you wish. We now have the pleasure and the honor to turn to the IEA, the International Energy Agency, always a very, very good address when it comes to understanding the world of energy. And for some years now, for more than 5 years now, you're analyzing at the IEA also the hydrogen development. And I have to be honest, there are hardly any studies, surveys better than yours. Of course, Hydrogen Europe's monitors exempted, but we are also collaborating there. So Jose Bermudez, he's the energy technology analyst at the IEA. He is also the coordinator of the Clean Energy Ministerial and the Hydrogen Initiative. And whoever wants to learn in a nutshell how the status of hydrogen in the world should read this part of the annual report. So Jose, you are here with us and you brought your presentation. Happy to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chatzimarkakis. I'm going to share the screen and hopefully everything will go smooth. If you can confirm that you are seeing it now.
Yes, we see the screen.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's an absolute pleasure to be in this webinar and to have the opportunity to present you with the trends that we are seeing in the hydrogen market. As you say, in the last 4 years, 5 years since the Future of Hydrogen report in 2019, we have been closely following the sector. And actually, since 2021, we are publishing this annual publication, not trying to compete with Hydrogen Europe, but actually, as you said, trying to collaborate and to try to extend the type of findings that you are having for Europe on a global perspective. So actually, everything that I'm going to say here is available in the report that we published last September, and I invite everyone to read it. So going directly to the business, I would like to start with some positive news about the project pipeline for low emissions hydrogen production. So at the time that we published our global hydrogen review in September 2023, the potential production that could be achieved by 2030 from projects that had reached a final investment decision was 1.7 million tons. Now, 12 months later, when we published the Global Hydrogen Review last September, we observed an acceleration on these FIDs. And actually, the potential production from the projects that have taken this final investment decision doubled to reach 3.5 million tons, which could increase today's production of low emissions hydrogen fivefold by 2030. But the potential is much larger than this. So the projects that have reached FID account just for 7% of the total potential production from announced projects, with almost half of these projects still being at very early stages of development, meaning that their realization is still highly uncertain. This is a global picture, but the situation is not much different in Europe, where a larger share of the projects are at more advanced stages than in the rest of the world, but still only around 7% of those are in a final investment decision. And moreover, not all is good news when it comes to the growth of low-emission hydrogen production over the past 12 months. Several projects face delays or have even been cancelled, which is putting a significant part of this potential project pipeline at risk. Underlying reasons are varied. They include regulatory uncertainties and clear demand signals, financing hurdles, incentive delays, permitting issues, or operational challenges. Looking a bit more closely to the FIDs, we can also draw some conclusions. At the time that we published our review in 2022, there was just 6 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity that have taken FID. But in the 12 months that led to the publication in 2023, we saw 7 gigawatts of additional capacity reaching final investment decision, boosted mostly by the developments in China and a significant contribution from the Neon Green Hydrogen project in Saudi Arabia, which is today the world's largest project that has reached a financial closure so far. But in the last year, we saw another 6.5 of potential of electrolysis capacity that took a final investment decision. China strengthened once again its leadership, accounting for 40% of this capacity, but it was followed by Europe, which quadrupled the FIDs compared with the previous year. India has also emerged as one of the key players, but just with a single final investment decision for what is the second largest project in the world with 1.3 gigawatts. In total, electrolyzer that is today in investment decision, or that has reached an investment decision, now stands at 20 gigawatts globally, which could result in close to 2 million tons of low-emission hydrogen production. China accounts for half of this capacity, building on its expertise in mass manufacturing of clean energy technologies, since the country is today home to 60% of global electrolyzer manufacturing capacity, something that we have observed in other technologies such as batteries or solar PV. In the case of projects for the production of hydrogen with fossil fuels and carbon capture, utilization and storage, we have also seen a tremendous acceleration in the last 2 years of final investment decisions. Back when we published the report in 2022, there was only one project in the US that had reached final investment decision, which has a potential production of below 0.1 million tons per year. 2 years later, 14 more projects have taken a final investment decision, boosting this potential production for low emissions hydrogen in 2030 close to 1.5 million tons. In this case, it's North America who accounts for the majority, actually more than 3/4 of this potential production, building on the experience in the region with large-scale oil and gas projects. But supply is only one side of the coin. The other one is demand. And here, despite progress being made, the picture is less positive. Efforts to stimulate demand for low emissions hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels are now gaining some traction as governments start implementing key policies. And we can think about the carbon contracts for difference in the case of Germany, or the EU mandates in aviation or shipping. We estimate that globally, the implemented policies can stipulate a demand of around 6 million tons of low-emission hydrogen by 2030, mostly in refining, in industry, and in transport. This could increase up to 11 million tons if government targets for demand creation are met. However, most of these targets are still not backed with concrete policies. And this amount is actually 3 million tons lower than what we estimated last year due to some downward revisions of the targets in industry, in transport, and in power generation. Yet the amount of low-emission hydrogen production that has taken final investment decision, or that is already operational, which in total accounts for more than 4 million tons, is below that level of the potential demand coming from policies and targets. This gap may be seen as a call for action to industry and governments to facilitate offtake and help unlock investment on the supply side. At the same time, government targets for demand are far smaller than their own government targets for low-emission hydrogen production, which could reach up to 43 million tons by 2030. And of course, the potential supply that I have mentioned that could be achieved from the project pipeline of announced projects, which accounts for 49 million tons. Policy measures today are still insufficient to create the level of demand that would be needed to scale up production and meet government targets. In addition, some of the more ambitious actions, and I think in this forum a clear example are the RED III targets for industry, have not yet been implemented or translated into national legislation, and they lack clarity regarding how they will be implemented to help industry to move forward with investments. We have already discussed about production demand, but we also need to talk about the transport infrastructure needed to link production and demand. Over the past year, there have been numerous announcements for hydrogen transmission pipelines within and between countries. Together, these announced projects total account for 40,000 kilometers by 2035. And most of these announcements are actually concentrated in Europe. However, progress has been really slow, with only 2% of those projects reaching investment decisions. Meanwhile, outside Europe, the most ambitious project in the world, which is in China, and is for the longest hydrogen transmission pipeline to date, which could be up to 700 kilometers long, is backed by committed investment and is due to start construction soon. However, there are also some news about progress in Europe. Over the past year, several TSOs in countries such as Denmark, France, Italy, Spain have launched calls for interest to assess the demand of hydrogen transmission infrastructure. And also the German government recently approved a plan for a 9,000-kilometer hydrogen pipeline network. However, we have also seen delays in key hydrogen infrastructure projects, which are raising concerns about the pace of development. These setbacks not only slow down development of critical infrastructure, but also limit the potential for low-emission hydrogen production projects to find and reach the sufficient off-takers, which is potentially delaying also final investment decisions on the supply side. The development of underground infrastructure is also of importance since it can support handling supply disruptions and improving the resilience of the system. Recent announcements for hydrogen storage projects globally account for around 10 terawatts hour by 2030 and 40 terawatts hour by 2050. To put this in perspective, today's natural gas storage capacity is around 5,000 terawatts hour, meaning that these projects represent less than 1% of current natural gas storage. Gas DSOs in Spain and Germany have launched calls for interest during the last 12 months, and there are already a few salt cavern projects under construction in Europe, in North America, and in China, including the reconversion of existing caverns previously used for natural gas storage, and some demonstration projects in Austria and Germany have begun the first injections and withdrawals of hydrogen into porous reservoirs, such as depleted gas fields. However, these projects represent a very minor fraction of the total announcements. So I would like to finish with a brief explanation of the policy recommendations that we have set in the agency and in this report of the Global Hydrogen Review, and I hope that they can serve to also stimulate the discussion in the upcoming panel. First, governments should take bolder action to stimulate demand for low-emission hydrogen through the implementation of policies such as quotas, mandates, carbon contracts for difference, etc. Also, industrial hubs where low emissions hydrogen could replace today unabated fossil-based hydrogen production, and public procurement to encourage the development of lead markets remain important untapped opportunities by governments. Government should also provide targeted support to the project developers in this scale-up phase to bridge the cost gap between low emissions hydrogen and fossil-based hydrogen. Timely support is critical to unlock investment decisions, as we have experienced in Europe with a wave of FIDs after the confirmation of funding for several large projects that occurred last summer. There is also a need to strengthen regulation and certification of environmental attributes of low-emission hydrogen. The International Organization for Standardization has already released a methodology that provides a standardized approach to assess greenhouse gas emissions. But now it's time for governments to implement clear regulations that set thresholds for acceptable emissions level in hydrogen production and implementing mechanisms that can allow mutual recognition of certificates around the world. Government should also strengthen efforts to accelerate the development of hydrogen infrastructures to avoid further delays that are risking slowing the scale-up of low-emission hydrogen production and demand. Without timely infrastructure development, this link between supply and demand cannot be established, and this hinders market growth and creates uncertainty for both producers and consumers. And finally, we think that advanced economies and multilateral development banks should provide targeted support to emerging markets and developing economies for expanding low-emission hydrogen production and use. These countries hold significant potential for low-emission and low-cost hydrogen production, but face key challenges such as access to financing. And I will leave the presentation here. As I said, I hope it can inspire the upcoming panel, and back to you.
Many thanks, Jose Miguel. Very inspiring and very clear. Shadow and light, light and shadow, so positive and negative aspects. I would just like to allude to the last point you made, that it's not something Europe should look into its own. It should look also into emerging markets worldwide. And in this respect, I just would like to bring forward the point that the Commission, the College the whole basically body of commissioners will visit Delhi, so India, end of the month. I think one day after the announcement of the Clean Industrial Deal. And it seems that hydrogen and some derivatives, but especially fertilizers, will play a crucial role in the strategic cooperation between EU and India, and also the development of electrolyzers. But let's talk about this, and I'm happy that you, Jose, stay with us in the discussion, so we can also come back to you. I would now like to invite to the panel our panelists. So Håkon Folldal, he's the CEO of Nel Hydrogen from Norway. Pablo Vasquez Caero, he's the COO from Alquimia. Cristina Moro Marcos, she's the general manager on environmental and climate change affairs at ArcelorMittal. Then also Vibeke Rasmussen, she is the senior vice president product management and certification at Yara Clean Ammonia. And last but not least, Jose Miguel stays with us, of course. You see, it's a quite Norwegian Spanish panel today, it's but gender balanced. So let me put it like that. Can I start with Håkon, who has been appointed CEO of Nel basically in July 2022, and before he was executive vice president at Tomra. He had several positions in the economy, and he is an economist, industrial economist, with a master from the Norwegian University, NTNU. Håkon, you are one of the strongest, the loudest, the clearest voices in our European electrolyzer industry, and we appreciate that very much. The European Green Deal was designed to drive Europe's industrial energy transition, but has the current policy framework already delivered on its promises? With the hydrogen market still struggling, and we saw in Jose's report to take off, why do we need an industrial strategy to bridge the gap between expectations and reality? What is your assessment here? Håkon, you have the floor.
Well, I think, as you know, it's fair to say that the market has not developed as expected. The Green Deal doesn't deliver on its promise. We see that a lot of projects have been cancelled, put on hold, or delayed, and electrolyzer factories are definitely operating well below their capacity limitations. And the media seems to enjoy writing about this, so people are left with the impression that it's all bad. But I would say that many projects are moving on, they move forward, but in the same way that you don't hear about all the flights that safely reach their destinations, only the few that don't, there is limited focus on the hydrogen projects that do progress. And I would argue that the quality of the projects that we see is better than on the first projects announced a couple of years ago. What is clear is that it will take longer to reach the targets that we have set and that we envisioned a couple of years ago, and there is simply not enough offtake to justify, many large-scale projects in Europe at the moment, and that's why the projects are refocusing or going down they're shrinking in a way in size. We see many more small to medium scale projects, 10 to 50 megawatt, where producers learn how to de-risk downstream processes, and off-takers can start buying some small quantities, symbolic quantities, and over time increase. And that means right now the pressure is on the companies to right size. Nel has had to reduce their employees. At the same time, technology development is advancing. So why do we need the industrial deal? We need to combine as one of the speakers said, the decarbonization potential with an industrial strategy and plan for Europe, because we see this furious race for global leadership in clean technologies. A global competition where global rules and norms are not respected. And we are navigating geopolitically turbulent and unprecedented times. And that's why we need to put hydrogen and the Green Deal into a larger perspective. We need to link it to an industrial strategy that companies can believe in. We can't continue just to do small R&D pilots and experiments. If this is going to go from a few megawatts to really, hundreds of megawatts and gigawatts, we need a broader industrial plan.
Can I just ask on the Chinese dimension, because that is something that concerns us very much, and I would like to take the opportunity to ask you directly, how much do you see this as a big challenge? And I'll discuss that also with the others, but you as an electrolyzer company are definitely more affected. We saw in José's slides that this is a challenge. So what's your take here?
I didn't get the
China, the Chinese challenge.
I think that is a big challenge because, again, we don't have common rules. We if they were simply better, I think it would be fair, if they could beat us. But what's the challenge is that there are all these hidden subsidies and rules that are not respected. So I think if we want to have an industry in Europe that survives, we need to make it more difficult for China to enter Europe. Remember that, let me use one analogy. Is Google allowed in China? No. Is TikTok allowed in the US? Yes. At least it was. Is that fair? I think in the same way, Europeans are not allowed to compete on Chinese projects. Why should they be allowed to compete on all the European projects? I think we need to give the European industry a bit more time to mature, and we need to allow Chinese players to compete in Europe if they respect the European rules. But they can't be in the way that it's a game of soccer where it's 11 against 15 players. That's how it feels at the moment. So I think with the hydrogen bank, the rules set in the auction, that's a big step forward, and that doesn't have to be permanent. But right now, it's not fair competition.
Got the message. We acted accordingly as Hydrogen Europe. But let's listen to the voice of a basic project developer in one of the countries that is very, very strong, in Spain. Pablo Vázquez Caero, the CEO of Alchemia. In 2018, Pablo joined Capital Energy to support the company's transformation into a fully vertically integrated renewable energy utility. Since 2021, he has defined and executed the green hydrogen business strategy, driving the creation of basically the subsidiary Alchemia, a spin-off of the group. As CEO at Alchemia, his mission is to establish green hydrogen as a key energy vector in Spain. So one of the countries I had the honor to visit last week and saw that the Prime Minister of Spain came to a big conference of Venagas, putting 400 million on the table and say, please develop much more of hydrogen economy. What is hampering us, Pablo? And it would be good also if you could allude to the electrolyzer issue, because you are affected by the hydrogen bank tenders and the non-Chinese aspect, only 25%, but nevertheless. Pablo.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank Hydrogen Europe for the invitation, especially to Jorgo for his leadership and engagement. I just want to share the vision of an independent Spanish developer with a gigawatt scale portfolio of green ammonia and green methanol projects in Spain, Portugal, and Chile. What we see is that the market has not been able to use the hydrogen that was planned to be produced because of the lack of infrastructures, and as well because of the uncertainties. The off-takers are not ready to take a commitment for the time frame that it is needed for a project finance that is going to be the financial structure that is needed for the launch of the hydrogen projects. So we suggest two points. One of them is we need auctions for green ammonia and green methanol, and then IR and SAF, and we need it to be for 25 years. That's what we understand that will suit the life of the project, and we can reduce the cost, and a AAA client that will take that off take. And the second thing that we think that we should do is we need pipeline spreads that will connect soon renewable hubs with the off-takers with a willingness to pay enough, that is refineries, chemical plots, and fertilizing factories. And those 2 points will help us to do so. Regarding the electrolyzers, we do believe that as we understand, well, we need a percentage of the hydrogen produced within Europe and not at the end bringing it from outside. We need a percentage of the electrolyzers to be produced here. We've got a huge opportunity to big tier 1 producers of electrolyzer. The Europe as an ecosystem with the chemical history that we've got, the producers of electrolyzers in the past 100 years were European mainly. So we need to use this opportunity to enter this blue ocean of opportunities in this new paradigm.
Excellent. And I think we are continuing to discuss this. So you described that you need more support with tenders, concentrating on, the products, the derivatives of hydrogen. That was excellent. I'll come back to that. But demand is the main issue. So all these products would go to some companies or some consumers who demand hydrogen. And back from Spain to Norway, I would come to one of the biggest consumers of hydrogen in the world, to Yara, the company that is known for ammonia and for fertilizers, and would like to welcome the Senior Vice President, Product Management Certification, Vibeke Rasmussen. She joined Yara in 2014, where she has been responsible for research on environmental impacts and circular economy. Then she was strongly involved into fertilizer product quality and held different positions prior to joining the Yara Clean Ammonia unit in January 2022. What can we do, dear Vibeke, to enhance demand, to make you buy more or purchase more green and clean hydrogen? Vibeke, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just want to say, thank you, Jürgen. As was said, I'm part of Yara Clean Ammonia, which is a 100% owned subsidiary of Yara, and we were set up to really encompass and find business in the new value chains for ammonia. So we have, of course, our existing decarbonizing the fertilizer value chain, but also for ammonia going into the power sector to fuel, maritime fuel, and also as a hydrogen carrier coming into Europe. And I think it's really understanding a bit of the scale. Today, we are actually moving about 20% of the ammonia which is transported around the world. And only about 10% of the ammonia today is actually moved and transported. The rest of it is captured and used where it is. And I think it's also understanding, as I say, the scale of ammonia or fertilizer production. We have today also the largest, I would say the largest electrolyzer hydrogen plant in Europe in operation today, which is 24 megawatt. But that is only hydrogen for about 3% of the ammonia production at the site in Norway. So it's a very small part of a very large scale production. So for ammonia, and it's not enough then to say that you incentivize or you put regulations and targets on ammonia production for the use of hydrogen, because that also needs demand centers and demand downstream. So the end customers, and how do we incentivize end customers to really start using low carbon products? And I think that is also a shift where we can not only put targets on the upside production supply part of it, but you need also to incentivize the demand side.
Absolutely. And we started beginning of the year to discuss exactly this with the European Commission. We'll come back to it in our second round. But before that, let's go to another big customer of hydrogen, which is the steel sector. And we are pleased to welcome Cristina Moro Marcos, the General Manager, Environmental and Climate Change Affairs of ArcelorMittal, here at our panel. She has extensive experience in environmental management and regulatory affairs and is currently serving as General Manager of Corporate Environment and Climate Change Affairs at ArcelorMittal since July 2019. So, Cristina, what can we do to help the steel sector to go more for hydrogen solutions? Direct reduction of iron ore has been the promising issue in order to clean or green the steel sector, but that needs a transition and a support. How could this look like? Where are we at the steel side?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, indeed, we are in a quite difficult situation, right? And I think that a number of elements have been already explained by previous speakers. I think that the European Green Deal aims indeed for a transformation, and one of the things that was the basis for also the transformation is to have a competitive economy, and that is something that we are missing. We are missing level playing field, and actually for the steel industry, you might have been aware of the demonstration of steel workers yesterday in Brussels, requesting to save our steel in Europe, because I would say that we are facing what we could call kind of the perfect storm, right? So there are a number of elements, starting from the fact that it's well known that we are a global commodity with international market prices, so any kind of local distortion due to energy prices, additional CO2 cost impacts our competitiveness and actually opens the door to imports, right? So in the current situation, we are facing a huge global steel overcapacity. So 2024, it was around 560 million tons, expected to rise above 600 million tons in 2026. On the other hand, we are producing in Europe now about 126 million tons of steel, and only China has an overcapacity much larger than the European market demand. So basically, we have seen steel production shrinking since 2008 by 30%. And basically, we are in a situation where, let's say, we are running at capacities of 60%. It's not really sustainable. So we have certainly a problem in that side. A second pillar of building, let's say, this storm is that the well-known different climate ambitions in different regions that lead to, for example, additional carbon cost in Europe, being Europe extremely ambitious to reach this climate neutrality by 2050. That requires that Europe implements effective carbon leakage protection measures. And now we are moving from, let's say, the free allocation approach towards the CBAM. And what we see is that some elements of the design of the CBAM present some shortcomings that might trigger, let's say, that are we face resource shuffling, circumvention. There is no real solution for exports, and we need to have a number of critical elements and concrete solutions implemented in order to allow or to convert to provide a level playing field. I mean, not to say, it has been also mentioned, the extremely high energy prices in Europe. They are very high, I mean, too high to compete, right? And for us, energy today represents around 30% of our production cost, but with the decarbonization, it will increase, because if our needs of electricity today are of about 75 terawatt in Europe, we will by 2030 need, with the decarbonization, around 160, and then by 2050 400 terawatt. That means, let's say, similar to the whole consumption of Germany. So actually, it's not the impact today; it's that this will actually increase in future. So basically, we need to decarbonize. We know we want to decarbonize. We know we need to invest, but there are a lot of unclarity yet in elements like, let's say, having trade level playing field, having, let's say, energy costs that are competitive or that allow us to be competitive, and that's a little bit the reason why making any investment decision in Europe today is extremely risky. That's unfortunately the situation today. And of course, we rely on the new, let's say, expected policy initiatives to tackle these elements, because we want decarbonization. We do not want the industrialization, and that actually will not solve the climate problem in the world, just moving emissions outside Europe.
Fully understood. And that was exactly the dilemma that drove Teresa Ribera, the new Executive Vice President of the European Commission, together with Dan Jurgens and the new Energy Commissioner, to invite the hydrogen sector 8th of January, 10 o'clock in the morning. So first working day in the new year, 2.5 hours with the hydrogen sector. And it was good to discuss with both new commissioners, but also to see their commitment in trying to combine the Green Deal with the new Clean Deal. I would like to discuss now with you something that was brought forward in that meeting and will most probably also appear in the Clean Industrial Deal. We saw an allusion to it. It was already mentioned in the Compass, the Competitiveness Compass that was published last week by Mrs. von der Leyen herself. And this is lead markets. Jose already alluded to lead markets. And let's stay in the steel sector. I would like to come back to Christina to describe a little bit the lead market, and to ask first Christina and then Håkon, because electrolyzers are made out of steel, whether this could be a way out. So the idea to establish to begin with, three lead markets, one on green steel, one on fertilizers, and one on refining, is to come up and to draw a sandbox, a regulatory sandbox. This is foreseen in the European Net Zero Industry Act, part of the European Green Deal, where you can go for a fast track. You can define a fast track procedure by simplifying rules. We saw that both Mrs. Wechsler, but also the idea of the Clean Industrial Deal mention simplification. So all the heavy instruments that we have basically burdening upcoming hydrogen markets would be removed, not forever, of course, but for a certain time of transition that is needed to create these lead markets. At the same time, if you have simplified rules, what is green hydrogen? I'll refer to it in steel. Could be that you start with gas, natural gas, because a DRI would work with gas, but with a clear sunset clause. You cannot do it forever. You do it for a certain time in order to get the process going. Then you cut and you you impose blending with green hydrogen, and there will be a phasing out of gas within 10 years. So that's the idea here, and I would like to get your idea. We also have fertilizer green markets. I would discuss that later on with our other participants. But maybe, Christina, did you consider these green lead markets to be something which is valuable for this development? Of course, imposing public procurement to go for that clean steel and not for the cheapest steel, because otherwise, you talked about the overcapacities, especially in India, in China, there will be no chance for the European steel industry to survive. So do you discuss that at ArcelorMittal? Do you consider that as a good combination of green and clean?
No, absolutely. And actually, I mean, as mentioned, there are a number of elements that are required in order to move forward the projects. And indeed, certainly one is to have lead markets to boost them. And I would say that, of course, one way is needed is via public procurement. But I think that we need to go beyond. That would not be, let's say, sufficient to really create sufficient, let's say, basis for that, right? So at certain point, for example, thinking about particularly steel, we could have public procurement. For us, might be 5–10% of our production what can go to public procurement. That's why we think that it should be expanded, for example, to off-takers of our steel. So to allow, for example, the automotive market to account for the savings, the greenhouse gas savings along their tailpipe emissions, right? So to clearly go through the whole, let's say, value chain and get this benefit not only in areas of public procurement, but at the same time, this market should also be aligned with, and I would refer again to an effective CBAM, right, which also closes loopholes. For example, that let's say these same rules apply, let's say, apply to prevent and stop high carbon imports, let's say, in Europe. So it's really, we need to go far beyond beyond green public procurement to trigger investments. So we need really that a scheme that is not only, let's say, applied to our European manufacturing, but be sure that all products that are sold in Europe, in European market, have these, let's say, requirements to prevent that there are, let's say, circumvention.
Thanks for the support of the basic idea. So I alluded already to the fact that electrolyzers are made of steel, and so are wind turbines or windmills. So are, of course, cars. But let's stay with the clean tech, so electrolyzers and wind turbines. Håkon, what would you think about being included in that lead market green steel? Basically also as an off-taker, not only as a producer of hydrogen, but in the end as an off-taker for the production of your electrolyzers. I'm not talking about obligations to you, but about sitting around a table in this lead markets where you are treated as a partner, you participate as a partner. What will you think about that, and did you consider that already?
Yeah, I think we have looked into what is the additional cost of using fossil-free steel in our products compared to buying normal steel. And for us, the sales price will go up by 3 to 5%, which I think is an acceptable premium. But I think we have the same challenge as Christina has or Vibeke has when it comes to selling the products. I think there are two potential ways the EU could go. One would be to massively subsidize green technologies and make up for the extra cost of going green. And clearly the EU doesn't have the financial firepower to do that. EU is not China. They're not willing to spend as much money on this as they probably should. And then you could argue that the alternative is a proper carbon tax, but that won't work only in Europe. That's sort of a global thing. So in my opinion, what we probably should consider is to use the market mechanisms in a smarter way, and that is to stimulate demand for green products. And I think that is more effective and efficient than the EU sitting there, choosing which projects to subsidize, which OEMs to get funding for their factories, etc. I think it would be nice if, like in Norway, to use one example, there have been subsidies on electric vehicles, and that has been extremely effective. Now, they reintroduce these fees. But the thing is, 9.5 out of 10 cars that are sold are electric. Could we do the same for cars sold in Europe with green steel? Can we give them a discount on taxes, or can we give them credits to apply against, you know, the extra cost? Because that will create demand for Christina. Same with household appliances or electrolyzers. You know, instead of funding projects directly, can we create a market for these green products? Can we do the same in agriculture? Can we reward the farmer for using, you know, sustainable fertilizers? I mean, I think that is what is needed if we want this to sort of take off on a larger scale.
Fantastic segue to Vibeke. But before I elaborate on the fertilizer lead market, that's exactly the idea, Håkon, of this lead markets, to find a way to finance or to fund the premium. So what is it? What is the extra price? You mentioned it for electrolyzers. It's an amount that is payable. So that's the idea, to sit together in the lead market and to say, this would be the amount that we need to somehow pay. Who is it to pay? So in the fertilizer market, we have the biggest budget of the European, or the biggest chunk of the European budget, which is called the Common Agriculture Policy, CAP. And the idea would be, and I would like to see Vibeke's reaction, to pay the green premium out of that CAP, and to make this an instrumental part of the of this lead market, green fertilizers. And we don't want to risk. We saw yesterday the steel workers indeed in Brussels. We previously saw farmers. We don't want to risk to see farmers again. But by benefiting them, by giving them the premium for basically the good behavior, we prevent this. Vibeke, what do you think about that? And I would also like to hear Pablo's view, because he's a project developer. He wants also to see the support in other parts of the supply chain. But Vibeke, what's your take on this?
I think that is a discussion that has been had, that you have a form of incentivized eco scheme under the CAP, which would really drive the development of decarbonizing agriculture and also food production and the food chains. So there is a way a scheme could be developed to really incentivize the ones that want to uptake sort of the decarbonized or low carbon products. And I think the issue is also, as was said here, also for steel, that the fertilizer industry in Europe is today one of the cleanest is the cleanest in the world, also because we have the catalysts on the nitric acid production. So also then schemes that you actually have true certification, so you actually know the true carbon intensity of the different products, I think is also important mechanisms. And also we are a big advocacy for, as I say, fertilizer production is scale. So we also need then to look at technology neutrality. And to start this and to really incentivize this industry, it needs to be also low carbon and CCS to be part of the solution. And as was said, also it's a global industry, so it's really, and fertilizer is a bit different because it's cyclic. So the northern and the southern hemisphere doesn't have sort of, or the need for fertilizer at the same time. So it's truly a global commodity. So also under mechanisms that we need to take into account also, as it was said, CBAM export mechanism for European producers.
Excellent. Before I come to Pablo, I would like to ask the panelists to look into the Q&A, because there are some questions to some of you. It would be difficult to go one by one through all the questions, but you might be encouraged to answer, because some of these questions are oriented to one of you. Please have a look. But before we come to that, Pablo, what is as a developer, what is your priority when we design these kind of lead markets? I mentioned 3 areas. I think you are actively involved in these areas. Spain has steel production, has fertilizer production, of course, the refining. So where would you put the highlight, and do you like the concept? Would you support this concept?
Definitely. We as I said, off-takers, they've got 10 years time to buy the product that we are offering them. We need more time frame for them. We know that if you go to the structuring of the project finance, if we've got 25 years instead of 10, and if we've got a AAA final buyer, if with public aids we can come to an offtake, we can put that paperclip to the project, and all the stakeholders around the project, politicians, EPC contractors, permitting, public servants, investors, everybody will look at that project with much more care, so we can lead that project to fruition. And that's very, very interesting from our side.
Excellent. I understand that it creates a new fascination, the concept of concentrating on concrete steps, because, and I would like to ask also Jose how he sees it on a global level. You mentioned lead markets, and maybe you can give us some idea whether these kind of approaches to create lead markets in other parts of the world did lead to successful developments. We talk a lot about China, and there possibly this kind of lead market thinking is a guiding principle. However, we need to also see that this technology neutrality that was mentioned by Vibeke, by Professor Wechsler, it is part of the Clean Industrial Deal, is also something which sometimes is questioned by some of also our members. I mean, Håkon knows it very well. The electrolyzer companies are, of course, interested predominantly in green hydrogen because you produce mainly green hydrogen, of course. But is that return to technology neutrality also something that could boost the whole kickoff of the markets? Because we are looking for market making mechanisms. Is the cannibalization also an issue there? So, Jose, lead markets globally, and do they look into colors, or are they tech neutral?
Thank you. So actually, in terms of, well, practically everywhere in the world, there's discussion about how to stimulate demand. And this idea of lead markets is quite recent on the sector. And I think in the sense, Europe, once again, in terms of thinking on how to stimulate through regulatory mechanisms, this kind of how to move forward with the hydrogen sector is leading. So we have not heard a lot of discussions, and I think I will completely leave apart the situation in China. I think Kako mentioned there are plenty of hidden subsidies, a lot of decisions made through government companies, which we don't have here in Europe. It's a completely different model, and I think it's something that we cannot replicate as such. We need, as it was mentioned, to find ways to help European industry to compete with them. But in terms of replicating some of the things that are going in China, it will be very difficult and probably not even legal in the European framework. So I think it's not examples. But in that sense, I think Europe is leading on the idea of stimulating market. We have lead markets, sorry. We have been tracking anything that has gone on the demand creation side in the last 2 years, because it's when a lot of people have started to put forward the idea that we have been focusing far too much on the supply side and leaving the demand side completely abandoned, as we can say it. And it was actually European companies, the ones that first start saying, like, we need to focus much more on the end products, on electric vehicles that will use clean steel produced through hydrogen or CCS, in fertilizers, so the end products from fertilizers, so the ammonia that is used and the hydrogen that is used on the production of ammonia is clean. So it's actually the European companies, the ones that have been leading this effort. So it's difficult to find examples in which this has worked. I think once again, Europe is taking the first step, and that will also, of course, will be faced with uncertainty, but in our opinion, is taking the right step. And then on the other side, about technology neutrality, I mean, for us, I fully understand the position of fertilizer electrolyzer companies, of course, but in our case, when it comes to hydrogen, the main idea is to support decarbonization and energy security, and in that sense, having a technology neutral approach, we think that is the correct thing. So focus first of all on the low carbon or the lowest carbon emissions intensity possible, more than going from one or other technology. Of course, in a continent like Europe, there are countries that naturally will go for one option or the other, but when we think about the continent as a whole, it will create the market, and it will also stimulate innovation on the end use side to make sure that a lot of technologies that are still not commercially available for stimulate the demand side will be able to access a cheaper supply that can help it to work more on that innovation side on the end users, which is again where we are seeing a lack of progress. So in our opinion, we think that is good to go for a technology neutral as long as we speak about low emissions alternatives. So there was like an old idea in which whether we could grow the market with hydrogen produced from unabated fossil fuels. And we think that this is not a good idea, because we will be going through the idea of creating assets that will be stranded in the near term if then we really pursue the idea of decarbonizing the energy system.
Excellent. Thanks, Jose Miguel. I would like to take now a few ideas from our comments here, and would like you to comment yourself, possibly starting with Pablo. So Peter Coppens says we need to fast track, hence we need to shortcut procedures as they take too long. In a crisis suddenly, when shown with Russia, who shut down the gas supply, we did so. Why can't this be done as well in the energy, hydrogen, and industry challenges? So this is a comment. I would personally like to already say on this, this is what we mean with lead markets. So it's shortcuts, it's fast-track procedures, and it's basically in the same logic as the idea that the reaction that we had on Russia. Also, I see reactions from outside Europe, so from Algeria, from India, asking us Europeans to be a little bit more flexible and more approachable, because certain elements of the current legislation do not allow to import into Europe. That's something which is very, very important. And the last comment is, if I wish to stimulate demand for green products, an anonymous attendee says, there are regulations that could, just a second, no, that's another one. Sorry. Here. Mechanisms, the green hydrogen stability mechanism, Falk Fernbach says that, combining a carbon price floor to keep fossil fuels expensive with a combination with contracts for difference, CFD, that guarantee a minimum price for green hydrogen, ensuring investment security. This would counterbalance US subsidies and China's industrial scale. This sounds very, very interesting as something we could introduce also into this lead markets. Also based, I'll come back to something that Vibeke mentioned, the carbon content ISO standard, because that exists. We have this on global level. Pablo, do you want to comment on these ideas that have been brought forward here?
Do you want me to give you some ideas on our wish list to really set the fire in the hydrogen? Okay. As I told you from the beginning, we need competitive auctions for the final products. We are talking about ammonia, methanol, because they're very fashionable now, but we know that DRI is one of them, and SAF too. Okay. Meanwhile, we develop the network of pipelines to use them just to inject the hydrogen we can produce. But once we begin with the pipeline planning, we would like to highlight that we need 3-4 spots in Spain, or 3-4 spots in every country, and to connect refineries that they've got a willingness to pay enough to help the developers to come to the financial close. Then the third point is that we should do this cherry picking of projects, tier 1 projects, with this due diligence that will put those projects as a tier 1 as the feasibility from an economic point of view, from a social point of view, and from a technical point of view, and we can allocate in them either a grant through a competitive auction or an offtake for 25 years, as I said. So this paperclip on those projects will make them attractive, so investors, politicians, everybody will push for the projects to come to fruition. Then permitting, that's the name of the game. And 5, we need as well point of consumption from the grids, and to make it easier, because we add to the system the possibility of flexibility. I mean, in the evening peak, we can slow down our production, so we flatten the demand, we flatten the prices, and we are a very good flexible demand to come to a LCOH, that it is competitive with those places, with those stranded power worldwide, where we can bring the hydrogen or the ammonia or whatever from there, but because of our position, we can trade off with the grid. We make really competitive the final products.
Many thanks. Let me turn to Vibeke. How would you comment on this and give me your wish list? What do you expect?
I think for us, it's really all about creating demand, and I think for technology neutrality is important. We don't see, or we don't think that really the cost advantage of Europe is going to be there for the foreseeable future. So having that technology neutrality, both on the technology side, but also on the energy side, and not be too dependent on one energy, and not only renewables, but as you said to begin with, Jorge, also look at low carbon PPAs or even, let's say, nuclear. I think also the focus on the emission reduction for the really large industry. I think Europe is dependent on the existing large industry as well as the new technology. So, and for them to do it's not something that you could just switch overnight. You know, it's this will take some time, and then it's, as I say, incentivizing the end users, so they actually are incentivized or get a reward for choosing to decarbonize.
Excellent. So farmers in your case, but not only, also the food industry, of course, yeah, can incentivize that. Yeah. Christina, similar approach?
Yeah, I think that we are mostly on the same line. In our case, again, we need to have a level playing field, right? So as mentioned in the beginning, we need to really have a more assertive enforcement of the European trade defense instruments, also with effective safeguard measures, because we need really, let's say, again, to be able to compete, let's say, at the same level. Again, to move forward, part of this level playing field should be set by reinstating, let's say, improvements in the CBAM. I mentioned already, we need to avoid circumvention, resource shuffling, and let's say the localization of the downstream sectors by expanding the scope of CBAM. But also we need to preserve European steel exports, because now they will face, our products will face the full carbon cost, and certainly there will be no business case for exporting European steel outside Europe. Again, energy cost. We need a significant reduction of the energy cost, because otherwise, it's not only our capex. Our capex to decarbonize is huge, but our OPEX, it's extremely large. So, this, again, the business case will not fly unless the conditions change. And then the last point that we discussed, certainly lead markets need to be established to drive demand for green steel in Europe.
Thank you. Excellent. Håkon, there is one remark in the question and answer saying the person is confused, anonymous attendee, because there's a gap that you mainly refer to between the demand of hydrogen to reach net zero by 2030 and what we currently produce today. And then you said that you had to make redundancy because the market of hydrogen is quite there. Person asked, what is missing? Of course, it's the price gap, but maybe you can elaborate on that by telling us your wish list and main points.
Yeah, I think, for my factories to be full and for Nel to be successful, I need Christina and Vibeke to move forward with their plans, right? So I think they have spoken at length about what is needed in order to use more, let's say, green and blue hydrogen in their processes. The reason it's not taking off is because the cost gap towards gray hydrogen or fossil fuels is still too high. And I'm super optimistic about what technology can do long term. So I'm optimistic about the capex part. I think we can in 2030 get to where BNF and others believe that we will be in 2050 or 40 at least. I think we can do that much quicker. But to get there, we need also operational experience and feedback on what we're doing. So I think we will have a couple of years where we move slower than we anticipated. But as long as there are some projects moving forward and we gain experience and we continue to invest into R&D, I'm quite confident that we can get the cost gap down. But on my wish list, I have these mechanisms to close the gap between green hydrogen and gray hydrogen. So the industries you mentioned, Jorgo, to be sort of lighthouse industries. I agree on the regulations around Europe. And I also have a couple of more sort of short-term things the European Union can do. Why can't RFNBO producers use subsidized renewables to produce RFNBO compliant hydrogen? I think it's nonsense. That is one wish I have, that we can use subsidized renewables to produce this RFNBO compliant hydrogen. I think accumulation must be allowed. Why can you not collect subsidies both from local government and the EU if it's a good project, or maybe if you could accumulate subsidies and funding from several sources, you get what you need in order to make the project happen. Instead that you have a project that receives some money from the hydrogen bank and then it stays in that evaluation phase forever. And the last on my list, I always wrote very long Christmas lists, but the last thing for me is the third round of the hydrogen bank auction, where we, in addition to having an LOI between the developer and an electrolyzer OEM, also have an LOI between the developer and an off-taker.
Excellent. So that's what we plan for our next Hydrogen Week, basically, to have something like meeting points between off-takers and, of course, developers and producers. Thanks very much for these wish lists. Very well received. We also saw a lot of activities and questions and answers, and we will come back to most of them in written form. So thanks to all of you who have given your names. Thanks for that. Jose Miguel, any hope for Europe in a very short answer?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, and I think it's the feeling that we need to leave this webinar with. Of course, there are challenges ahead, but I think little by little we are putting the instruments to make those challenges easier to deal with. And if I can leave here just a wish list, is also the transposition of the RED III targets as soon as possible to national legislation. And I'm seeing some nodding there, so I think it's another part of the wish list of everyone, to make sure that we have the clarity that today the private sector is not having only through the RED until it's transposed into the national legislation.
A very good wish and very important wish, because that would make sure that there's a lot of demand, but knowing the political world and the politicians, this might take some time until this RED III is transposed into national law. But until then, let's create this lead markets and let's make it a fast-track procedure. Thanks very much for your participation. Extremely valuable insights into the market. Also extremely timely, because we believe that with this discussion we can contribute also into the last minute changes of the clean industrial deal. And so your wish list hopefully and surely will be heard. Thanks to all of you. Thanks on behalf of Hydrogen Europe, and looking forward to the next H2 talk, and of course to the publication of the Clean Industrial Deal, 26th of February. We are looking forward. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.
Bye.